And Supervisor Vargas, we are live.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the May 7th joint meeting of the Sandiag Transportation, Regional Planning, and Borders Committees. We are holding this special joint meeting given the two agendized topics of mutual interest amongst these three policy committees as we begin to anticipate the release of the draft 2021 regional plan. The committees would also like to share our deepest condolences for the people of Mexico regarding the tragic collapse of the Metro rail structure in Mexico City this past Monday. They're all in our prayers. With that, I will ask everyone to please join me on the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United
States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty
and justice for all.
Thank you so much. Next, I'm going to ask our clerk, Ms. Francesca Webb, to confirm that we have a quorum. Ms. Webb?
Thank you, Chair. We do have a quorum.
And Supervisor Vargas, can I ask that we do the Spanish translation?
Supervisor, you're muted.
I want to make sure that everybody knows that we do have translation available. And so if anybody needs that, we're going to be able to do that. So do you want me just to go ahead and?
Yeah, if we can introduce Carlos, our translator.
Carlos? Is he here?
Thank you, Supervisor. Good morning. Buenos días. Como acaba de indicar la supervisora, se ofrece el servicio de interpretación simultánea para esta y todas las futuras sesiones. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación, solo necesita desplazarse a la barra inferior de Zoom donde aparecen sus controles y ahí verá un icono que dice Interpretation, interpretación. Parece un globo terráqueo. Simplemente lo selecciona y selecciona Spanish o español. Si nos está acompañando desde un dispositivo móvil en Zoom, una tableta, celular, etcétera, primero presione los puntos suspensivos, luego Interpretation y luego el idioma. Por último, si no desea escuchar de fondo el original en inglés, haga clic en Mute Original Audio o silenciar audio original. Muchas gracias. Thank you, Supervisor.
Thank you, Carlos, and welcome. We're excited that we're going to have translation from now on moving forward. All right, the next item, Ms. Francesca, can you confirm that we have a quorum? I think you did.
Yes, Chair, we do have a quorum. Thank you.
All right, so I'd like to remind the members of the public on our process for both member and public comments. The primary members will be using their cameras and we will take live public comment. Members are asked to turn on their cameras when they have a comment or question, and then I will then recognize you. I'll ask our legal counsel. Do we have any member comments? No. I'll ask our legal counsel.
Thank you.
Okay, Gustavo.
Thank you, Chair Vargas, and good morning, everyone. I have a couple of quick announcements that are of interest to you and also to the public. The first one is regarding traffic volumes on our highways. Our traffic volumes on our highways is nearly at 2019 levels, and actually in some highways we are right at 2019 levels. So some of the smaller volumes, lower volumes that we saw during the pandemic are no longer here. So people should plan for a little more time in their trips. All of our ramp meterings are active in the morning and the afternoon commutes. We have canceled the additional time that we had given contractors for lane closures and freeway closures in the construction jobs. And in June, we're planning to restart the operation of the movable barrier on the I-15 express lanes for the morning commute. Tonight at about 9 p.m., we will start a weekend closure of the southbound on-ramp at I-5 and Ponciera. This is part of the I-5 North Coast Corridor construction. During the weekend, we will be reconstructing the ramp. And basically, before Monday's morning commute, we will have a brand new ramp on that southbound portion of I-5. The detour will be handled through Cannon Road. Also tomorrow, at State Route 94, we will be conducting more freeway cleanup, as well as swarm maintenance. We will be closing 94 in the westbound direction from 805 to downtown San Diego. We will be picking up litter, doing graffiti removal, vegetation control, fixing potholes, fixing striping, and doing some electrical work as well. So if you hear the buzz out there, it's because we're doing swarm maintenance. And this continues the great work that our crews did on State Route 163 in April. And last weekend, we also worked on 94 in the eastbound direction, and we will continue working and cleaning up State Route 94 for the next 3 weekends. This is Public Service Recognition Week, so I want to give a shout out to all our public servants out there. Thank you all for joining this noble profession and for all you do for your communities. And last but not least, happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there in the board and in the public. Thank you.
So I got super excited about public comments, and I forgot to ask legal counsel to go ahead and remind us about public comments and how they work. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Amberlin, and thank you, Gustavo. I appreciate you following the rules.
Thank you, Chair. As noted on the cover page of today's meeting agenda, in addition to emailed comments, the public may also provide live comments during the meeting. When public comments are called for on an item, please click on the raise hand icon in the Zoom toolbar, which is located at the top right of your screen. The clerk will then call on you by the name that you have provided. If you're participating by telephone, please press *9, which will raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak. The clerk will then call on you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number. The instructions for providing live comments are also on the bottom of the cover page of today's agenda, which can be accessed from SANDAG's website at www.sandag.org. All comments, whether they were emailed or live, will be made a part of today's meeting record. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments or any member comments?
Chair, we do have a member of the public who'd like to speak.
Fantastic.
Nicole Burgess? You can go ahead when you're ready. You'll have 3 minutes.
Great, thank you, and good morning, Chair Nora Vargas and board members. Appreciate the time and wishing you all a happy Friday and a great bike month. May is Bike Month, and I just want to encourage board members and public to sign up for the SANDAG Bike Month Pledge and to really experience your local trips and your neighborhood by bike. As data shows, over 2/3 of our trips vehicle are within a 2-mile distance. So when you in your car, you turn on your car, ask yourself, can I do this by bike, right? So make that pledge, get out there and make those local trips. I really just wanted to comment, as this is a joint meeting with Borders, to share a really huge, big vision for our region. To me, the border is, and to others, all of you out there know how extremely important our border is. And making those efficient crossings is extremely valuable. And we've invested in millions to improve our border crossing. So just a huge, big vision, maybe that has, maybe is new to some people. Friendship Park over by the border state field is an amazing little area that, has access through there. And perhaps there is a vision, there is a feasibility to create a biking, walking access through that park. I mean, really, a couple agents would needed to look at, verify passports and stuff. But if you could actually create a safe walking and biking access through that corridor, and then let residents catch the trolley at Iris Station, I think those communities in La Playa and Rosarito would be super excited to have that, as well as even residents in America that want to go down there. Anybody who knows and has tried to take a bike from the Tijuana border to Rosarito knows that it is almost, it is super, super dangerous and very, very difficult. So just a huge vision for our San Diego region, and thank you for the time to make that comment.
Thank you. Any other member comments? I did want to share really quickly that this past week, the Board of Supervisors unanimously supported a commitment from the County of San Diego for the Bridging of the Digital Divide SR 67 fiber project. And so this is a great partnership with Caltrans and SANDAG. And we're going to be able to take advantage of the road work by investing additional funds to add microfiber in this project to bridge the digital divide. And so I'm really excited about seeing that project. And more importantly, that we're working together to get this done for our community. So I want to make sure that I share that with all of you. See no other comments. I'm going to go ahead and move forward with item number 1. Public, we have, I'll ask any of the members. We already had, Dios mío. Next is the executive director's report. I'm slow today. I want you all to know that I went to a chicken farm this morning at 7 o'clock in the morning at Southwest High School. So I ran in here to do my meeting, and so I'm a little behind, so I apologize. I'm trying to catch up, but there's some great farming opportunities happening in my district that I'm super excited about. So with that, let me turn it over to Hassan. Hassan, buenos dias.
Thank you. Buenos dias. Good morning, Chair Vargas, Chair Mary Salas, Chair Sergey Dedina. Good morning to all you committee members. Before I start my report, I want to give my heart and prayers for the people of Mexico for the awful structural accident that happened there. On behalf of the staff, we wish them speedy recovery, those who are injured, and we're really sorry for the loss of life. I would like to address a couple of issues that are important. One of them is about equity that came up recently regarding interpretation at our board and public meetings. We fell short in reaching non-English speaking communities in a stakeholder meeting last month. We had not hired translation services for the stakeholder meeting, and some of our attendees felt slighted. I apologize. I took full responsibility for that. That will not happen again. And I have instructed staff that interpretation services will be available for all board and policy advisory committee meetings like this one. And thank you, Carlos, for the interpretation today for us. Again, shouldn't happen. Take responsibility. Sorry for that. And Gustavo, my partner from the director of District 11 and myself sent a letter to the activist to that point. There is no excuse. Shouldn't happen, will not happen again. Now interpretation services will be available at all public meetings. SANDAG firmly upholds equity and inclusion for every person in the San Diego region. We hold ourselves accountable to the communities we serve and acknowledge we have more to learn and more to change. Reaching as many in the community as possible is our goal as we work to improve transportation throughout our region. And in the future, I promise you, we will be more diligent about the inclusion of all community members, regardless of language and cultural barrier. We have an obligation to eliminate disparity and ensure that accessible, inclusive, thoughtful, and safe opportunities are available to all of our communities. SANDAG is committed to creating a San Diego region where every person who lives, works, and visits can thrive. We are committed to doing better. We appreciate the feedback we have received in justified. And again, I just want you to know on camera that I am sorry and I take full responsibility for what happened. On the regional plan, today, we look forward to discussing two important issues with you, and I hope this discussion will prompt a public policy debate that this region must have. One, on social equity, and our recent telecommute survey. I know many of you are trying to figure out what happened after we open up for business. Would employees come back? What sector will come back? Will they telecommute? Will they do it once a week or once every 2 weeks or once every month? To that point, I informed my staff yesterday that we're gonna start the notice to return to the office June 15th, a gradual return with full operation by September, and with a very clear policy for telecommuting moving forward. Discuss with the board leadership and policy committee leadership about the live meetings and when they're going to resume very shortly. We invite you all to participate in these plan workshops because this month, on the 28th, we are releasing the draft regional transportation plan. And to give ample opportunity for our leaders to engage and debate, we scheduled 2 additional workshops for the board and the policy committee members on the board, May 17th and May 21st. So if you can't make the May 17th, try to make that May 21st. They will be the same workshop, but we want to make sure that we leave no issue out of discussion with our leadership. This is important. These workshops is going to dive into the detail of the plan, why certain projects didn't make it, why some did, what kind of programs. And we're not going to get into project-specific debates and one mode after another, but we're going to get into the system, the multimodal system of the 5 big moves. We started with a vision, now it is a plan, and that plan have a system, and that system costs quite a bit of money, and I'm sure debating that is important. So again, May 17th and May 21st. If you can't attend both, you can at least attend one. A little update on the Del Mar Bluff. We continue to work with our partner from North County Transit District on emergency repair to the railroad near Del Mar Bluff. I'm proud to say the crews completed the first phase of this work early, so the rail closure that was planned for last weekend was able to be canceled. We anticipate the crews to continue working through the summer. As I informed you in an email, we did receive $10.5 million from California Transportation Commission for that repair. As I also told you, long term, we must remove that track inlet. And a study right now by Sandag is 6 months away from concluding an alternative analysis of how we do that. Mobility hubs is one of the 5 big moves, and we have 30 around the region. The 2 biggest being the Central Mobility Hub and the San Ysidro Mobility Hub. It's an exciting opportunity to truly look at mixed land use development, economic opportunities, environmental sustainability. Like them in many places in the region, we think this mobility hub an opportunity to provide affordable housing, provide an opportunity for people to change modes, and for high-speed transit to connect to the rest of the region. I want to conclude my report by wishing you all a happy Mother's Day and thanking you for your continued involvement with Sandag as we move forward in trying to compete for the national stimulus, whenever that is finalized. And finally, I want to thank Supervisor Vargas and her colleagues, all the supervisors, for the action on digital divide. And just to put it in perspective, my partner, District 11 Director Gustavo, was amenable enough to try at the last minute to include laying the candidates for broadband on the 67 as a pilot. We will be the first in the state to do that. Why? We thought that's important, and I'm grateful for the supervisors. You know, we have to mean when we say social equity. We want all of our community, especially minorities and low income, to have access to good broadband and to have access to good internet. And those right now, you'll be surprised of the percent of residents in low-income communities that don't have access. And that means they don't have access to opportunities. So with doing this, we're gonna look at region-wide access, and want to make sure it's affordable. So with that, Supervisor Vargas, that concludes my report. Be very happy to answer any questions from the members.
Thank you, Hassan. Are there any public comments?
No, Chair, no hands from the public.
Okay, are there any member comments? Ms. Figueroa?
Thank you, Supervisor. I just want to thank on behalf of the Consulate General to Mr. Ikrata for his kind words and condolences regarding the terrible incident in the Mexico City subway. And also thank you all board members and SANDAG for your efforts in favor of social equity. We are here to help from the Mexican Consulate, so please count on us on anything we can do. It makes our job a lot easier to have these efforts from you in favor of social equity. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other member comments? All right, seeing none, thank you. There is no consent calendar for this meeting, so we're going to move on to reports. And the first item is item number 3. The next item is the remote working in the San Diego region survey of business and employees. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Antoinette Meyer and Ray Major of SANDAG, and they're going to give an overview of the research and data on this matter.
Good morning, Chair Vargas. Buenos dias. Today, I'm excited to release to you a new survey that we did here at SANDAG. As you know, we talk about data all of the time, and data really drives all of the planning that we do over here. And in the last year, we've had this incredible event, this COVID event that really changed the travel patterns and work behaviors in the region. And so one of the things that the data science department does here at SANDAG is to field surveys. We collect a lot of information from primary sources. We collect data from the state and local governments. But one of the things that we do is to actually go out and interview and survey people. And we do this so that we can really get an understanding for what's happening in the region, so that when we do our transportation plan, we can plan around these events. And so today I'd like to introduce the first survey that we've done that is related directly to transportation and travel and COVID and how people work remotely. And with me today is Dr. Timothy McLaurin. He's the president of True North. They're a consultant that we use on a regular basis to do the data collection when we're collecting via survey. And he surveyed both businesses and employees to get an understanding of what was going to be happening. He's also been in charge of doing our cross-border survey and commuter behavior survey. We've talked to you about those before. We also have Antoinette Meyer, who's the Director of Mobility and Innovation, and she'll also be co-presenting this presentation. So for today's agenda, what I'd like to talk about really is how we're going to move through this uncharted territory of getting back to work. A year ago, we had to close everything down, and that was uncharted, and now opening everything up is uncharted again. So Dr. McLaurin is going to talk about the survey methodology. Antoinette is then going to follow up and talk about the results of the employer and employee survey. I'm going to take that data and try to apply it to our region so that we can see geographically how this impacts us. And then Antoinette will finish up by talking about how telework and transportation planning works. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Dr. McLaurin to discuss the survey methodology.
Thank you, Ray, and good morning, Supervisor Vargas. Much of the details of this presentation are going to be handled by Ray and Antoinette, but at the outset, I thought I would talk a bit about the survey methodology, as well as talk about some of the key takeaways. Is there a PowerPoint presentation to accompany?
Yes, Kendall, could you start the PowerPoint?
The production team's working on pulling it up right now.
Thank you. Okay, this is the other presentation, I believe, the social equity presentation.
There we go. Okay, so before we talk about the results, it's helpful to take a moment to talk about the survey methodology. There are actually 2 surveys conducted as part of this study in unison. When you think about remote work and what the future of remote work looks like in the San Diego region, it's important that we talk to the 2 key sort of players in that. That's businesses in the region as well as employees that are in the region. And so we had a survey of businesses, 577 of them, as well as a survey of employees, or a little over 1,000. Both surveys were conducted using what's called a mixed mode approach, or mixed method approach. We used multiple recruiting methods, in this case, email as well as telephone, as well as provided individuals with multiple ways to participate in the study. They could take the surveys by phone, they could take them online at a password protected website. What we found over time is that by using a mixed mode approach where you're recruiting using multiple methods and you're also giving folks multiple ways to participate in the study, you're going to have a higher participation rate and you're going to reduce response bias and ultimately get a more reliable survey than you would if you were relying on one mode only, for example, online only. The business survey, we started out by looking at the comprehensive view of businesses in the San Diego region. How many of them are there? What industries are they in? What size are they in? Where are they located within the industry? And then we use what's called a stratified random sampling methodology to select businesses at random to be participating in the study. By stratification, I mean we divided it, in this case, by the industry types, as well as size of business and their location within San Diego County to meet and match EDD data that we had available. For the employee survey, similar kind of approach. We stratified first by geography to make sure that we're getting the proper distribution around the county. And then we randomly selected households and started calling into those households. We screened individuals to make sure that they are currently employed, since we're wanting to talk to individuals who were employed and talk about their work, remote work arrangements. And that data was actually closely aligned with Census ACS data for employees by region, not only by industry, but also by age of employee. Now, because these were both random samples and not an actual census of all of the businesses in the region or all employees in the region, they have what's known as a margin of error due to sampling. In this case, for the business survey, it's plus or minus 3.8%. For the employee survey, somewhat larger sample, it's plus or minus 2.8%. What that means effectively is that we can be 95% confident that the results we'll talk about today are within either 3.8% for the business survey or 2.8% for the employee survey of what we would have found had we spoken with all businesses or employees in the region. Next slide, please. So these next 2 slides just give you a quick overview. I'm not going to dig into them too much, but what they're designed to do is show how our sample matched the actual universe for the region. So this is the employee survey, and the thing to focus on really is the far right column over there. You can see that there's a lot of zeros or ones or twos there. That's the percentage difference between our sample and the universe of employees in the region by county subregion, by age, as well as by the industry in which they work. So you can see that our sample matches very closely to what the overall profile of employees in the region looks like. Next slide. And here's the business survey, same basic analysis. And you can see here on that far right column again that we are either an exact match or within 1 or 2 points for virtually all of the categories there in terms of businesses when you compare our sample to the actual profile of businesses in the region based on EDD data. And next slide, please. So a few key takeaways from this before Ray and Antoinette get into the details. The first thing, having a chance to do this research and then dive into the data deeply, the one thing that sort of jumps out obviously is that remote work policies and practices did in fact change dramatically in response to the pandemic. We had, prior to the pandemic, our research suggests that about 27% of businesses, only 1/4 of businesses, would offer at least one of their employees the opportunity to work remotely from home at least 1 day per week. During a year into the pandemic, at the point in which we took our survey, that had jumped to 47%. So the percentage of businesses that were offering a remote work option to at least one employee had about doubled. In terms of employees working from home at least 1 day per week, that also increased dramatically to the point where 1 year into the pandemic, more than half of the employees, 54%, indicated that they were working from home at least 1 day per week. And then one interesting way to look at this is to look at the average number of days teleworked per San Diego employee in the region. Prior to the pandemic, that was less than 1 day per week on average for all employees. It was 0.8. And at the time we took the survey about a year into the pandemic, that had jumped to 2.2 days per week. So we did see, this ramp up in terms of businesses offering the opportunity for remote work and employees taking advantage of that opportunity. That said, the second bullet there is also one of the striking aspects of the study, is that these changes, this increase in remote working, was not even across industries or occupations or by employee demographics. There were certain industries and businesses in certain industries that were able to take advantage or at least respond well to the new situation with the pandemic and shift to a remote work model. Some of those greatly ramped up that practice, and professional services and finance and insurance services industries, for example, were able to take advantage of that. Meanwhile, there's other industries in the region, such as healthcare or manufacturing or food and accommodations, for example, that really didn't have the same opportunities. They didn't have as many teleworkable jobs, and so they weren't able to respond. Similarly, we also found that when you look at the employee side, your ability and their ability to shift to a remote work model really varied based on their occupation. You tended to find that sort of white collar professional occupations and higher paying occupations were generally those that were more able to telework, whereas blue collar and lower paying occupations typically were not as well. And then obviously there are some demographic correlates with that as well in terms of who was able to shift and take advantage of this and who was not. Thirdly, it's interesting, we took the opportunity in the study to not just figure out what businesses are doing, but we wanted to ask them, both in businesses and employees, what their experiences were with remote work now that they've had the better part of a year to engage in it. And what you find is that businesses and employees don't really see eye to eye regarding the impacts of remote work on key aspects of their business or their employment, particularly productivity, profitability, overall work quality, et cetera. You tended to find that employees leaned positive overall. And again, these are generalizations. You'll see in the data that there are employees who weren't happy with their remote work situation. But for the most part, employees leaned positive and saw the upsides of remote work, in particular in terms of their own work quality and their own perceived productivity, et cetera. Businesses, on the other hand, tended to lean the other way, right? For the most part, they tended to see that their profitability and their productivity and the quality of work was, on the whole, negatively impacted by comparison. Now, what's interesting is both businesses and employees did agree that remote work creates some significant challenges when it comes to teamwork, when it comes to collaboration, and when it comes to communication. On those points, they were all agreed. And they all also tended to agree that remote work helped with their expenses. So finally, looking forward, obviously one of the $64 million question here is, where do we go from here? And what can we expect down the line in terms of remote working in the San Diego region? The short answer to that is we see that as the pandemic recedes, businesses and employees expect for the remote work to ebb as well. And so we're going to wind up dipping below the current sort of patterns in terms of remote work practices, but we're going to land above where we were pre-pandemic, right? So it's going to sort of ebb down, but we're still going to have more remote work happening in the region when compared to where we were prior to the pandemic. A couple quick statistics on that. The percentage of businesses that we're expecting to offer remote work to at least one of their employees, which currently is around 47% based on the research we did with businesses. That's expected to drop down to about 40%. Some businesses are expected to contract the percentage of their employees that they make that offer to. They might still offer remote work when they didn't before, but that's going to be to a smaller percentage of their overall workforce. And then when you look at it from employees' perspective, what their expectations are, and you put it in terms of days teleworked, at the point we did the survey, currently we had about 2.2 days teleworked for the average employee in the region during the pandemic. The expectation among employees is that that's going to drop down to about 1.4. So prior to the pandemic, we were at 0.8 days teleworked. We went to 2.2, and they expect it to drop down to about 1.4. And so that's sort of a kind of big high level takeaway on some of the key findings of the research. And at this point, I think I'm handing off to Antoinette.
Next slide, please. Thank you, Tim, and good morning, committee members. My name is Antoinette Meyer. I'm the Director of Mobility and Innovation for SANDAG. Before I dive into the employee survey, I just wanted to clarify really quickly that we will use the terms remote work and telework interchangeably. They both refer to an employee working from home. So as Tim described, we surveyed just over 1,000 employees who work in a variety of industries around the region to get a better understanding of how prevalent telework is among different occupations. This slide is showing telework practices before the pandemic compared to during the pandemic. And what you see in the chart on the left is that 68% of employees had never worked from home prior to the pandemic. During the pandemic, though, that number dropped significantly, with more than half of employees working from home at least part of the time. Before the pandemic, about 8% of employees reported working at home exclusively, and that increased to 33% during the pandemic. The number of employees that worked from home on a part-time basis also went up by about 5% during the pandemic. But what you'll see is that we've divided up the work from home partially category to help distinguish between those employees who work complete days at home on an occasional basis versus those employees that split their days between the office and home. And from a transportation planning perspective, this is an important to distinguish here, because employees that split days are still traveling to a work site. It's not actually removing a trip from the transportation system. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the primary commute mode of employees before and during the pandemic. And what really stands out here is that the commuters who were teleworking during the pandemic were predominantly drive-alone commuters prior to the pandemic. The drive-alone mode share dropped from 71% to 56%, while other modes remained largely unchanged. Next slide. In terms of expectations for the future, employees are a bit more optimistic than employers about how much they will work from home. So 44% of employees expect that they will work from home at least 1 day per week, and the average number of days they expect to work from home is just over 1 day. On the business side, 36% of employers expect to have 1 or more employees working from home at least 1 day per week after the pandemic. Next slide. But although more businesses will offer telework options, this does not mean that every employee would be given the opportunity. Most businesses expect to offer it on a part-time basis to a portion of their employees, as shown here on this slide. So the chart on the left reflects the percentage of employees expected to work from home 1 day per week. And what you see is that 15% of employers anticipate that 75% or more of their employees would work remotely 1 day per week. The chart on the right reflects the percentage of employees expected to work from home 3 or more days. So now just 10% of employers expect to offer telework to 75% or more of their employees for 3 or more days per week. Next slide, please. So one reason why employees might be a bit more optimistic about telework than employers is the perception of productivity. As Tim mentioned, about half of employees felt like they were much more productive working from home. In the chart on the right, you see that, but only 9% of employers felt like their employees were more productive working from home. This was not a surprise to me, though. It's actually been one of the biggest challenges for telework for a long time. So I spent a good part of my career at SANDAG leading our transportation demand management program, which is known as iCommute. And we work with employers throughout the region to develop commuter programs for their employees to help reduce VMT and greenhouse gas emissions by reducing single occupant vehicle trips. And one strategy we always promote with businesses where it's an option is telework. But the biggest challenge with getting companies to embrace telework has always been that managers generally feel the need to see employees working to believe that they're working. And it seems like the pandemic hasn't changed this perception much. Next slide. There are definitely some similarities, though, between employers and employees on both the pros and cons of telework. Both reported a cost savings. Employers can tap into a larger talent pool and retain good employees by offering telework. And this is likely due to greater job satisfaction and work-life balance. On the flip side, both business and employees felt like communication and collaboration was much more challenging. And there are great concerns about data security with employees accessing potentially sensitive data and information remotely. You know, one of the reasons that communication and coordination was probably a challenge was that both reported poor internet connections that make remote work and virtual meetings really challenging. So I'm going to hand it over to Ray. He's going to talk a bit more about some of the key industry trends and what we learned from employers.
So interestingly enough, as you saw in those graphs, a lot of people are teleworking still. And as Caltrans Director Delarda said, traffic is almost back up to normal. And so this is kind of an interesting phenomenon, because what's happening is that people are not necessarily going into their office, yet they are still commuting and they're still creating VMT. So that's something that the region is going to be experiencing going forward as we shift towards maybe a more hybrid approach. But when we took a look at the overall statistics from a business perspective, one of the things that we wanted to see is like, who's going to be able to offer teleworking? Not every business can have all of their employees telework. I mean, just think about a restaurant, for instance. You cannot have your servers, for instance, remotely working. And prior to the pandemic, about 1 in 4 businesses offered some type of a remote option, about 27%. And during the pandemic, about 47% of the businesses offered a remote option. So if you think about this though, you know, a lot of us, especially those of us who are in businesses that allowed for telework, you know, there's a perception that everybody is working from home, but that's not true. About 53% of the businesses couldn't have people working from home at all. In order to function, they still needed their people to come in. And so at the height of the pandemic, it was only 47% who were offering telework. Post-pandemic, we expect about 4 out of 10 businesses to be able to offer some type of a telework option. And this is great news in the sense that it allows many more employees to have flexibility throughout the region. Next slide, please. So what we did is to take a look, we took the data and we took a look at it by industry to try to understand if there was any difference or trends that we could see by industry. Because as you know, from some of the work that we've done here at Sandag, these industries are clustered in different areas. And by knowing who's going to be able to allow for teleworking, we can get an understanding or an idea of where we may have additional or less traffic occurring. And so these are the industries that had the least amount of change. So you see that the real estate and retail leasing industry at the beginning of the pandemic, or pre-pandemic rather, about 27% offered teleworking to at least 1 employee. During the pandemic, about 47% did. And the expectation is that will go back to 27% post-pandemic. So I'm not going to read every number and category for you on the next 3 slides because it'll just be crazy times. But what I want to do is to just highlight some of these industries. Healthcare is another one where you have to have close contact with people. You see many of those employers saying that we have to have our people back. Only about 23% will be able to telecommute. Manufacturing also requires you to be in a shop, for instance, like Taylor Guitar. So manufacturing is relatively low. And then other industries. Next slide, please. These are the industries that had a moderate change pre and post pandemic. And Kendall, you can just hit so we can go through there. These are about double-digit changes. So we see more businesses, for instance, in accommodation and food services, allowing at least one of their employees to work remotely. So there's a difference between a industry and an occupation. So for instance, there may be somebody who is in the accounting function at a hotel motel or at a restaurant, and they were working in an office. Well, those jobs probably can still be done remotely, although the actual servers have to go back to work in order for the business to be able to function. And so this category actually has the lowest number of people who can telework and do their job at 24% post-pandemic. And then you see retail trade, again, another one where you have to have people in close proximity to the goods you're selling. And so you see that's about at 32%. Administrative support is much higher than that, and as is wholesale trade, but there is a shift in these industries. Next one, please. So these are the industries that have the greatest change post-pandemic. And one is professional, scientific, and technical services. So if you think about this, this is the high tech, the biotech in our region. This is lawyers, for instance. They fall under professional services. And what you see is that a lot of this work can be done remotely, and nearly 76% of those businesses will be offering at least one employee a telework option post-pandemic. And you see about 78% are offering telework options right now. Educational services was about 14% pre-pandemic. We saw the schools all start to work remotely. That's why you see that 63%, that huge shoot up over there during the pandemic. And then it goes down to 42% post-pandemic. And the reason that I believe that this is so high is that many of the educational services are thinking that they're going to have some type of a hybrid system for a while. And so you may still have teachers who are teaching online courses until people are 100% ready to come back. And so right now there's this shift, and over the course of the next couple of years, you might see this go back closer to the 14% that was pre-pandemic. And then finance insurance, again, another one where there's a 31% increase in the number of businesses that will allow telecommuting, going from 30% to 61%, and then arts, entertainment, and recreation. And again, this is probably a lot of the backroom operations that were done on site that can actually be done remotely, and you'll see those type of employers offering that. So a lot of difference between different industries in the region. Next slide, please. I'd like to just show you a little bit about where those industries are so that we can get an idea of how this might affect the San Diego region in terms of transportation. And so these are our tier 1 employment centers, the ones in purple. These are the largest of the employment centers that we have. 8,700 businesses are here. We have about 328,000 jobs. We oversampled in these particular areas to make sure that we can get a good distribution of the businesses that were there, the headquartered businesses. And the graph on the left-hand side shows you the breakdown of the type of jobs that are included in all 3 of these employment centers. And we've talked a lot about this when we talk about the 5 big moves and how we're moving people in and out of there using different infrastructure. Next slide, please. So zooming into the Sorrento Valley area, what we see is that this particular area is dominated by professional, scientific, and tech services. Those are the Illuminas and all of the high-tech biotech, state, government, and education. UCSD is located in this area. Healthcare, the UCSD, the medical centers are up here, and then there's a lot of finance and insurance companies up there too. And this just kind of shows on the left-hand side of these bars the propensity of those businesses to be able to telecommute. So the greatest change was in, for instance, professional and scientific. The healthcare was on the slide that had the least change. So just kind of gauging the type of businesses that are here and whether or not they're telecommutable jobs. Next slide, please. Kearny Mesa has a more of a mix of businesses, but a lot of administrative support. Local government, this is where the county building is on Ruffin Road. And so a lot of government employment here that probably is going to be back in the office. There's some professional, scientific, and technical, but there's also retail, healthcare, and manufacturing, and those aren't as susceptible to telecommuting. Next, please. And then when we take a look at the downtown area, you know, all of the restaurants and bars on Fifth Avenue make up about 16% of the employment. We haven't seen all of that come back completely yet. Local government is down here. You know, you come down, we used to come here to the SANDAG board meeting, and we're all here. Moderate for accommodations, and then professional services. Next slide, please. This slide kind of shows you, just so you get an idea of how people telecommute or where people live who work in these areas. And I put these maps together just to show kind of an idea of where we might get some type of a relief, if at all, from telecommuting. Next slide, please. So in the downtown area, when we take a look at the percentage of businesses that are going to offer telework, pre-COVID, there was about 27% of the businesses that would offer telework. And now it's up to about 65%. So this bodes well in terms of, you know, of having potentially fewer people coming into the region at any one time. And I think you can see that too if you've driven the 163 or the 94 coming into downtown, that there is less traffic now than there was prior to COVID. Next slide, please. although it's getting bad again. These are the location of the employees who work in downtown San Diego. So you can see they're located from all over the county, and these areas like the Downtown Employment Center draws employees from everywhere, and they take, essentially all of the infrastructure is used to bring people to downtown San Diego. Next slide, please. This one represents what is happening in Sorrento Valley. And you see that there was a fair amount of businesses that allowed for telecommuting prior to COVID, but that's going to increase to about 56% of the businesses. Next slide, please. And you can see that here also there are a tremendous number of people who come from all over the region who work in Sorrento Valley. Next slide, please. And finally, this is Kearny Mesa. Kearny Mesa has about a 25% increase in terms of number of businesses that would allow for telecommuting. So next slide, please. And you see the distribution of people working in Kearny Mesa. And you can see that there are very many more people who live in the South Bay area and south of the 8 who work in Kearny Mesa than north coming down. And so this graph shows you the representation of that. And the final slide here shows the difference between our tier 1 employment centers and non-tier 1 employment centers. So non-tier 1 employment centers are all the other colored areas, and the aggregate data in those areas showed that about 11% increase compared to much more increase in the major employment centers. So this may have to do with the size of businesses. There are a lot of smaller businesses that exist in the tier 3 and tier 4 employment centers, and potentially they're not going to be able to offer telecommuting as much. That's to be determined. And so with that, I'll hand it back over to Antoinette.
Thanks, Ray. So now we're going to take a closer look at who can telework, the occupations, and how working from home changes travel behavior. Those are 2 key factors that we consider when we're estimating the % of employees that we expect to telework in the future as part of developing the regional plan. So telework is one of those strategies that helps us to reduce VMT and achieve our greenhouse gas reduction targets in the regional plan and our SCS. And our assumption for the 2021 regional plan is that telework will grow much more than we've ever anticipated in past plans. But we know that there are many occupations that can't be done from home. So to understand the potential for telework in the region and inform our telework target setting process, our senior economist did an analysis of the jobs that are conducive to telework. And what we found is that 39% of all occupations in the region are considered home workable. Now, this is a bit higher than the national average at 34%, but it's important to keep in mind that just because a job could be done from home does not mean that it will be done from home. It's really up to an employer to decide who gets to telework, when, and why, and there's a lot of factors that go into that decision. We also looked at the % of jobs in our region that are considered essential. So during the pandemic, certain types of jobs were defined as essential, and those included jobs in grocery stores and healthcare and transportation. So in our region, 64% of occupations are considered essential, and there are fewer essential jobs that can be done from home that are conducive to telework. Next slide. So one of the data sources that informed this analysis was a national study that came out of the University of Chicago last June, and it found that across the country, jobs that can be done from home are typically higher wage jobs in professional services. So jobs in management and computer sciences, architecture, and engineering are considered more suitable for telework. Those who work in jobs like food service, though, or healthcare support are much less likely to have the ability to work from home, and these tend to be lower wage jobs. Next slide. So our survey results are very consistent with this national study in terms of the types of jobs that can be done from home. So you'll see here more than 90% of architects and engineers and those working in the sciences have the option to work from home, while just 9% of individuals working in healthcare support or maintenance and repair services indicated that they have the option to work remotely. Next slide. Also consistent with the national data is the relationship between income and remote work. So in our region, only 36% of employees from households earning less than $25,000 a year averaged 1 day per week working at home during the pandemic, while 71% of employees living in households earning $100,000 to $150,000 a year worked from home an average of 3 days per week. Telework is also much more prevalent among white and Asian employees, with Hispanic and Black employees having fewer opportunities to be able to work from home. Next slide. So a common misperception is that teleworkers don't drive or generate much vehicle miles traveled. So data from our own household travel survey, as well as data from the National Household Travel Survey, demonstrate that teleworkers actually make more discretionary trips for things like shopping and leisure and social purposes. And a likely reason for this is that teleworkers aren't able to combine things like grocery shopping or dropping off kids from school and picking them up from school with their commute trip. Next slide. So when you look at teleworker trips and vehicle miles traveled prior to the pandemic, you see that permanent teleworkers actually make the most trips per day. These tend to be shorter recreational shopping trips near their homes though, which is why their VMT is still a bit lower. Occasional teleworks also take quite a few trips, and because of this, they generate much more VMT than you might expect. But when you consider the fact that commute trips really only make up about 1/3 of all trips in the region, this isn't so surprising. Next slide. During the pandemic, travel patterns definitely changed. We asked employees in our survey if they were driving more or less for different types of trips. And what you'll see here is that they reported driving less for social events and errands or recreation. Those are the blue bars on the left. But there was a significant increase in shopping online, having packages and grocery and food delivered to your home. So while they may not be driving as much themselves, they're still generating trips and VMT from all of the home delivery services. Next slide. And this probably helps to explain why VMT is near pre-pandemic levels, despite the fact that we have more people teleworking. Work trips make up a relatively small portion of the trips that many people make on a daily basis, and teleworkers just aren't staying put at home. So the chart on this slide shows the change in VMT on our major highways each month since January 2020 compared to that same month in 2019. And as of March, average VMT was just 6% below what it was in March of 2019. And as Gustavo mentioned earlier in his update, some of our highways are even already above 2019 levels. Next slide. So promoting higher rates of telework continues to be a priority for reducing congestion and VMT in the region. And based on the survey results, the potential's there for more telework. More employers have experienced it, they're getting comfortable with it, but we need to continue to invest in promoting it and making it easier for employers. So we have several initiatives that are underway to support telework growth. Recently, our TDM program, iCommute, launched a new telework assistance program that provides businesses with technical assistance to formalize and expand their telework policies and practices beyond the pandemic. And we would love support from all of you to encourage companies in your jurisdictions to take advantage of this program, to enroll. There's no cost to participate, and they receive customized consulting support. It's also essential that we improve broadband connectivity if we want to see more telework in the region. Poor internet service was cited as a big challenge by both employees and employers during the pandemic. So our regional digital equity strategy and action plan, which is currently under development, will lay out a roadmap for expanding and improving broadband infrastructure in the region, which should help to alleviate some of these connectivity challenges and make telework easier. Next slide. So that concludes the presentation today. We published the complete survey report on the SANDAG website, so you can dig into all those details yourself. We also published InfoBit, which is more of an executive summary of the data. I know we threw a lot of data at you today, so Tim, Ray, and I are happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for that. I was so many ideas. But let me go ahead and see if there's any public comments on this item.
Thank you, Chair. We do have a public comment on this item. Bear with me just one moment. I apologize. Nicole Burgess, you can go ahead when you're ready.
Good morning. Thank you for the presentation, staff. I really appreciate it. And telework and working from home has so many great benefits. But as Antoinette pointed out in the last bit, our VMTs are still increasing. They have not decreased. So people that work from home are actually more. So they're going to local trips, and that is unfortunate. So I think the biggest takeaway for me and from what we heard last week in our webinar at the Board of Directors, SANDAG must plan for not just commute trips. We must plan for all trips. And so those local trips that you can make by bike and foot is extremely important. And telework is not really going to be a strategy to reduce VMTs from the data that's being shown. So as much as I appreciate the efforts and all the work that's being into this, this is probably not one of the biggest strategies for our region. And just, you know, as we talk about where these trips are being made, I thank you, Ray Major, for showing where these people are traveling to these work tier 1 employment areas. So that's super valuable. And then just realizing from our last discussions last week, coastal access is extremely important and valuable for our region. We know that tourists, visitors, and all people in San Diego value our coastline and all the amenities that our beach access has for our region. So really having access and better transit and better transportation options to our coast is going to always be a critical component for us in San Diego. Thank you for the time to make those comments.
Thank you, Nicole, and Chair, that does conclude the public comments.
Thank you. Member comments. I see Mr. Member Cabrera.
Thank you, Chair. I'm wondering what, if any, currently incentives are there for businesses and companies to sort of encourage them to increase telework opportunities? And then coupled with that, is there any discussion either within our organization, regionally, federally, in terms of creating more incentives for that?
Antoinette?
I'll go ahead and answer that. So through our iCommute program, our transportation demand management program, we offer one-on-one consulting for employers to develop and implement telework policies and programs, training managers, training employees. So that's an incentive that we do offer to employers to help expand telework in the region. That is certainly available to the airport as an employer, and we would be happy to enroll you in that program.
Thanks. And just on the second part, is there any other, and I was also curious in terms of, you know, just good old fashioned straight up financial incentives for businesses as well, if there exists, or if there's any discussion either with the infrastructure bill or any other sort of discussions that are happening to take a look at creating more incentives.
Not that I'm aware of. Our government affairs program might be aware of anything in terms of, you know, federal incentives, but at the regional level, we don't have any financial incentives. We actually, when we put together the telework assistance program, we asked employers about, you know, what types of support they might need to expand telework, and financial support wasn't one of those things identified. It was more around the training and getting the policies in place.
So if I may add, Chair, to Councilmember Cabrera's question. You know, in the 80s, we thought telecommuting is going to be the answer to our congestion and all the ills of transportation, and that didn't work very well. The telecommute always were in a single digit part, you know, once a week, etc. And as a matter of fact, Sandag had a grant, a federal grant that Antoinette and her team, and we couldn't get enough employers to actually spend the money to participate. That's why you don't see in the national stimulus any talk about this, because middle management always were very doubtful that telework is going to work. So to answer your question directly, there is nothing that we know of that would offer employers. But given that in the last 14 months, we had to do it, that could change maybe. Frankly, there is so much yet for us to learn about what's going to happen after COVID-19. Right now, like Antoinette mentioned, vehicle mile travel is going to continue to go up. Therefore, greenhouse gas emissions is going to go up. So we want to be careful in promoting something that increases travel and increases greenhouse gas emission. Having said that, this survey that you heard about today is no different than my discussion with my almost 400 employees. I think the majority of them think they're more productive. They would like the chance to work from home. I with some of my executive team, feel differently about that. So as a business, you feel different than an employee. And that difference is going to have to resolve itself very shortly, because, you know, as we open up, we're going to get. But Frank, unfortunately, right now, we don't have enough data to make final judgment whether we should pursue additional funding to encourage employers to do that.
Thank you, Hassan. Member Zito?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks to staff again for the great presentation and the great data. One of the comments I would make is, there was this, in relative to follow on to Board Member Cabrera's comments, is one of the incentives for businesses to try to move this direction will be whether or not they feel that there is a benefit. And I would encourage us to start trying to collect data as well that demonstrates whether or not there is a benefit for different sectors. As an example, in the field that I've worked in most of my career, I'm still well connected with a lot of my former coworkers and peers, and I can tell you in the software field, every company that I've engaged with has clearly been able to measure productivity by the amount of code that's being checked in, amount of changes that they're putting into their solutions. And it's gotten the executive levels in those businesses very excited about teleworking because of the fact that they can actually see the productivity increase through the data being measured. And obviously that data and what we're measuring is going to be different for different industries, but I would encourage us to start collecting that type of data and sharing it as well, because it will help us to go out and evangelize more teleworking capabilities for a broader segment of the population. Thanks.
Thank you. Member Aguirre?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. That was super interesting. I found the perception of productivity difference is very interesting, how employees obviously feel, perceive themselves to be a lot more productive than the businesses themselves. I thought that was really interesting. I'm also appreciative of, the efforts to bridge the gap of the digital divide in my community in Puro Beach. We're a young community, we're a workforce community that tends to commute to go to the job centers, but we also have a large senior population that wasn't really able to access all the digital resources that we were making available during the pandemic. And we found that through our COVID task force. So I appreciate the efforts looking into that as well as the resources that Member Cabrera was mentioning. I think that's super important to explore as well. I do have a quick question regarding the iCommute program. Is that available only to a minimum amount of employees or size of business, or to any size?
We work with employers all size, 2 employees up to 1,000 employees or more. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
A couple of folks have asked about that, so maybe we can resend information to all the policy members, because I think it'd be great. I think all of us are writing notes very quickly, thinking about how we share it with our communities as well. So Member Jones.
Thank you so much, Chair Vargas. So I just had a couple of comments, and one was specifically about the North County employee surveys, because about 30% or 33% of all the jobs in the county are north of the 56 on the latest data that I have received, which is over 530,000 jobs. And unfortunately, when you only have a 3% return rate on these surveys, I think the numbers are very skewed for North County. I've actually already sent an email to the San Diego North EDC to get updated information, but I really would like for us to figure out how we can get better participation from North County so that we can get true numbers and know what people are really doing in North County. I've also reached out to one of the folks that is representing North County in our equity program, and so hopefully we'll be able to get better participation, because we really need to have these numbers so that we can make real decisions based on real data. Thank you.
If I can weigh in on that, this is Tim McClarney with True North. So the percentages that were shown in the table in terms of how our sample aligns to the universe are correct based on EDD data. So if you look at North County as a whole, for example, you have almost 40% of businesses in North County broken out between North County East, North County West, North County East, North County West. Those two account for 25 and 3%. So together they're about 28% of businesses based on EDD data. And that's what our survey matched. So it isn't that we only got a 3% participation rate from those businesses. It's that they represent 3% of the businesses based on EDD data in the North County subregion. So they represent 3% of the businesses within our sample.
Thank you. Member Gesterlin?
Hi, thank you. I want to echo Mayor Jones's remarks that we really need more data. I know Ray Major always likes it when I say we need more data. I would put out there as an example, very large employers in the area who track carefully. One is the University of California, San Diego, with thousands of faculty and staff and students. And as the university moves into hybrid, we're going to see a difference in commute patterns as well. And in fact, the university is limiting parking and changing parking patterns. And the encouragement will be that people come in for the meetings they need to be in for, but consider working from home. Part of that is parking, part of that is productivity. So at a place like university, and San Diego State University is the other place to look in our area for, kind of a captive large body that's already tracking much of this. You have a large entity, many people work there. They come from all over the San Diego region, and the enterprise is tracking who's doing what and how well over time. So faculty are tracked by grants, by teaching, by papers produced. Staff are tracked by tasks performed. So I would suggest that there may be some interesting ways, and I'm sure there are other large entities. These are the two that I'm familiar with, but I think we could do some interesting case studies here in San Diego over the next year as we come out of COVID and as we figure out what is this new work pattern that will blend as a hybrid, remote working with in-person. So I encourage this.
Thank you. Member Chu?
Good morning. Thank you, Supervisor Vargas, and all the people who made this report. I found it very informative. I have two concerns which may draw answers from Tim, Lee, or Antoinette. One issue is that this is push and pull with telecommuting and reducing VMT. So obviously the pull towards telecommuting, as we just see, may not be as great as we would like, or it's not working as well as we would like. So my other point would be then, why is it that people go back to driving? Why is it that driving is still so attractive? Which goes to the issues of why do we make driving that attractive in terms of costs and not charging for parking, subsidizing the cost of gasoline, to making it so much easier for drivers. So I hope that goes into the equation at some point, not so much trying to draw people into telecommuting, but looking at the other side of the equation, which is making driving so convenient that people have a tendency to go back to it. The other concern I have is the issue of equity. As is pointed out, we're spending, we know that people of color, poor people just don't telecommute. It's not as available to them, either because of the employment or a number of other reasons, and maybe lack of broadband services. So as we look at telecommuting and start spending a lot of emphasis on it, or even funding on it, are we not favoring particularly groups, those who already have that ability or have a higher income, as we spend time and effort on trying to deal with increasing telecommuting? So those are my two kind of concerns, and maybe that's how we can go forward in terms of better addressing this whole issue of how to reduce VMT. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Hubner?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, staff. In looking at the pre and post VMT, it looks to me, slides 27 and 20, well, try slide 28, that most of the post-pandemic increase in VMT seems to be local trips, like groceries and taking kids to school and going to the beach and errands, whereas it was, a lot of the VMT was commuter. So there are different roadways that we're using. How is staff using, first of all, did I get that right? And second of all, how is staff using that in their analysis of our roadway systems and what we can do differently?
I'll take that question unless Antoinette, you want to take it. Okay, it's her slides, but I'll talk about it. It's fine. So when you look at the commute trips to work, they were typically longer trips that were on freeways. And you're right. What has happened is that these discretionary trips that people take are on local roadways. And that's why, even though the VMT is near the exact same level, you may still see some reduction of peak traffic on the freeways, because a lot of the VMT or the trips are created at different times during the day. So although we're getting a little bit of congestion relief, we are actually creating more VMT because of these shorter trips that are occurring that are local trips. And that's exactly what's happening. And I think Antoinette mentioned, for instance, it used to be that people would stop on the way home and either pick up their kids or pick up groceries for dinner that night. Now, if you're working at home, you have to make a separate trip to go to the grocery store. Then you go out and pick up your kids, and then you go to the gym. And so you're creating a lot more VMT. And so that's true. And so one of the things that we're looking at in terms of modeling is how are these commute patterns changing? I mean, that's one of the reasons we want to collect this type of information, is now that we understand that there is a change or a shift, we can start to collect information for the model to help figure out how those commute patterns are shifting. But
so are we indeed creating more VMT if they're just doing those same trips, like picking up kids and stuff, just at a different time?
Well, that's what the data, the way I interpret the data, that's what's happening. Because if you take a look at the graph that was shown, that VMT is almost back to where it was pre-COVID. And as Gustavo said, some freeways are actually back. But we still have many, many businesses that have their employees commuting from home. So if you put those additional people onto the roadways, we will probably exceed where we were. And as Antoinette showed in one of her slides, the people who only commute 1 day a week, which is the most likely scenario that the post-COVID was, I think it was like 1.2 days per week, they actually generate the most VMT, even more than people who go to their offices. Because you're only home 1 day a week, and then you're doing all this other stuff that day that you're at home is truly what's happening. And so it's not the panacea that we may have thought at one point, but now we have empirical data that really shows us what's happening in terms of telework. And just to address what Councilmember Shu said, it's like the reason people go back to the automobile is that there is really no choice right now in terms of an alternative to driving. So now your employer requires that you come back to work. It's not like we've all of a sudden built out the 5 big moves and we can have people take an alternative form of transportation. So much of the thought that's in the 5 big moves and the regional plan going forward is all about coming up with an alternative to driving so that people can take these trips using some other method than the car.
And were these, was this data collected 7 days a week or just 5 days a week?
This particular data?
Yeah.
Tim, can you answer that question?
I knew I'd get a stumper here. I will go grab that and I will answer that shortly.
Okay, the reason for asking that is because maybe things that used to be done on the weekend are now being done during the week because of other reasons. I'm just really curious, about how all of this is, what these results are going to mean for us in analyzing and then implementing this information in our new work.
So Mayor Huebner, the data that was used in the charts on slide 27 that talk about the trip rates and the VMT per employee, these were pre-pandemic data from our regional household travel survey. So those are trip diaries. So those are the trip diaries that people took over a week period. It captures all of the trips that an individual took during that week.
A 7-day week, right?
Correct,
okay.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And then the pluses and minuses in terms of the percentage more trips or less trips, right? that was just more of a global, when compared to before the pandemic, are you doing this, more often or less often than you were in some degree? And that's what that was. So it wasn't in a set time frame. It was a little more broad.
Got it. Thanks. Good info. Thank you.
If I may add to what the staff said to the mayor's question. So right now, we obviously don't have enough data to be conclusive. We need more data, and I think Ray and his team, this is what big data and open data is all about, to have enough data to not only for the region, but for even researchers from universities. So it's not conclusive, but all indication from the data we have is overall travel goes up, but the congestion in the peak goes down.
Okay.
Or spreads the peak. And so depending if our goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emission vehicle mile travel, obviously this is not where we want to go. If our goal is to spread the peak, you think about it. Then obviously we have laws in the books to say we need to reduce vehicle mile travel. But the point I want to make is, and this is something that Ray Major and the planning team, Colleen Clemenson, made several times. This actually data makes the 5 big moves more relevant. Because the 5 big moves is a multimodal approach that provides choices, and sometimes these choices for local trips are more amenable to flexible fleets, an Uber and Lyft type of on-demand services that we're trying to do. But also it's about figuring out how do you put a transportation system that is not only takes social equity into account, but that's priced right. So when people decide to make a trip, it has an economic reason for that. So a lot of more data needed to be conclusive, but I think the statement Ray and I make all the time is when we say transit leap and we want at least 10% to take transit, we're not saying that everyone is going to leave their car, but we're saying that 10% out of the system is create a lot of benefits for the system.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan. Member Aguirre and then Member Edson.
Thank you, Chair. I have another question. It's estimated that 85,000 commuters are trans-border commuters. That number was doubled pre-pandemic. Are we taking data from them as well? Are we surveying them? Were they included in this survey?
Tim, I don't believe we surveyed residents. Yeah.
No. So to be eligible for on the employee side to do the survey, you would have to be a resident of San Diego County and employed in San Diego County. Businesses that we spoke to could be commenting on the remote work policies or practice they have, and obviously some of their employees might be coming across the border, right? But the employee data is all within residents of San Diego County.
So if they are employed but don't reside here, they were included? Because
in
we
the
have
employee,
a community in Mexico. I'm just concerned that we're missing a big chunk of our, of this entire equation.
So they were not part of the employee survey, because the employee survey, you had to be a resident of San Diego County and employed to be eligible to participate in the study. However, the businesses that we surveyed, right, when they talked about what their telework practices have been and percentage of their employees that are teleworking, et cetera, that could include people who were living in Mexico and coming across the border for work, right? So on the business side, that would encompass them, but on the employee data, it would not.
And what is that eligibility requirement? I'm not quite understanding that.
So the sampling frame was for employees who live within the San Diego region, meaning you have to live in San Diego County and you have to have been currently employed at the time we did the survey, right? Because we were focused on that group.
So is that flexible, I guess is my question. Can we include them next time we do a survey?
If that was of interest to Sandag, we could come up with that. I will tell you from a methodological standpoint, it's a challenge. I mean, we, for example, are working on the traffic and revenue study, as well as we did the cross-border travel behavior survey recently for Sandag, where it was all focused on individuals who reside in Mexico and commute and come across the border for either shopping trips or work trips, et cetera. So there is data on what proportion of the volumes come across are for work and where they're going and what types of trips they're making. So that data exists. It just wasn't part of this study.
I would encourage that we do include that because it is a large portion of this entire topic that we're talking about, and moving forward, especially as housing challenges continue to grow and people start to move into Tijuana, even though they're, expats, I guess, or cross-border citizens. I think it's an important part of the equation that we need to look at. So thank you.
Member Aguirre, I think that's also something that we can, when we're talking about equity, and we're going to be talking about equity in our next item, item number 4. I think the binational component, which I think this is what's beautiful about having everybody having this conversation today, because I think we forget about the power, the economic power of our binational region, number 1. And then number 2, there's a lot of stigma around, I think misinformation about whether you can or cannot live in Tijuana. I was a commuter growing up, right? I lived in Tijuana and went to school in San Diego. I can talk about it now, but when I was growing up, just didn't talk about it because you can get in trouble or whatever. And I think we as leaders have to talk about it some more, because you actually have a right to be able to live on either side of the border, and it's okay. And we need to educate our businesses so they understand that this is part of who we are as a region. And many people are having to live in Tijuana because of necessity of housing. And so I really think that it's something that we should incorporate into, just like we're incorporating, making sure we have Spanish language translators in our conversations, that we're really lifting up these conversations in each of our studies. And I have been very impressed by SANDAG really gathering information around the impact of our commuters, including around, we're going to be doing some of that at the APCD board as well, because it's really important, including about how we get additional resources into our communities from the federal government because of the power of the region. But we'll talk about some more about that. Member Edson, and then we're going to go ahead and move forward to item number 4 so that the team can start transitioning out as well. And thank you for everyone. Member Edson?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I actually raised my hand before Hassan last spoke, and he to some degree answered my questions, because I do think that beefing up public transit and especially microtransit, from hearing the data that Ray was speaking of, about more people making trips, short trips, to go to the grocery store, to pick up kids, to do those things. If we have more microtransit and infrastructure that supports multimodal transportation in all neighborhoods, I think that would be a boon to this. I think that that's the only way we're going to see that particular VMT reduced. Thanks.
Thank you. I just want to say, and we're going to transition to item number 4, but I wanted to say thank you for the robust discussion. And I want to thank the staff and the team for the information and sharing it with all of us. I kept taking notes. Having been an executive for one of the largest reproductive healthcare providers, we had 3-county region, and commuting was a discussion that we often had. And what I have found from a lot of the research that we did as an organization was that there's a lot of cultural shifts that have to happen around what productivity is, and also about what does it mean in our roles to employers, right? I mean, there's a lot of European countries in Europe. A lot of the work is no longer 80 hours a week, and I mean, there's a lot of shift that is happening in terms of what is, how do we survive and do well, and then quality of life for people as well, I think is important. And so as we're thinking about BMT and reducing our greenhouse emissions, I think it's much more complex than that, and really thinking about people. I think as an elected official, my role is always, how do you think about people in a holistic perspective, right? And them having a good quality of life as well. So anyway, with that, we are going to go to item number 4, and this is our 2021 regional plan for social equity. And we're going to have an overview of the social equity data and a draft of the social equity performance results that support the 2021 regional plan goals for a fair transportation system. So I am going to call on Ms. Colleen Clemenson for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Chair Vargas and members of the Transportation Committee, Regional Planning Committee, and Borders Committee. It's a pleasure to be with you here today as we move toward the final stretch on the regional plan. We are scheduled to release the draft plan at the end of this month. And we were able to work with the Transportation Committee and present to you last month an update on the work that was done to go from vision to plan. We are also able to share the cost estimates for the plan, a funding strategy, and really zero in on the data-driven process that has been used to develop the plan. The Regional Planning Committee also had an opportunity to get detail on the land use assumptions that are part of the plan. And we're pleased to have all three committees here today as we talk about how we are addressing social equity in the regional plan in a meaningful way. And just so we're all clear on the populations we're talking about people of color, people with limited income, communities impacted by poor air quality, and our senior populations. Next slide. This is what we plan to share with you today. First, we're going to have Ray Major, our chief economist, explain the diverse makeup of our region, the population trends, and how greater equity can contribute to our economy. And then Tueri Faola, our Sandag principal planner, will outline the social equity framework that we've been using to develop the plan and the framework that will be used going forward for planning at the agency. And she will also share the social equity performance measures and results. And so we've actually run all of this information about the plan through our transportation model, and we're getting some really good results when it comes to the populations that we're most concerned about. Next slide. Let's start with the legislative mandates that are really relevant to the topic of equity. And the first one that really comes out here is Title VI. And Title VI is all about ensuring that everyone is, no person on the ground of race, color, or national origin be excluded from participation in or denied the benefits of or subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. And Sandag plans have always met this. This plan is no exception. This is really critical for us to receive federal funding, is to ensure that we're meeting Title VI. But on the next slide, there's some things that are new with this plan. The first is State Assembly Bill 805. And all of you, and I know our board of directors, are familiar with the changes to Sandag as a result of Assembly Bill 805. You may not be as familiar with a component of Assembly Bill 805 that really gets to the air quality concerns in the region and analysis that we have to do to show what strategies are being used to address air quality in communities that have had some of the worst air quality in our region. Tueri will talk more about that in her part of the presentation. The other thing that's new is the Sandag Board of Directors commitment to equity, the equity statement that was adopted by the Board of Directors earlier this year. And this is the lens that is really being used as we do everything here at Sandag, and this plan is no exception. So with that, we'll move forward, and I'm going to turn it over to Ray at this point. Next slide.
Thank you, Colleen. Before I talk about this slide, I'd just like to talk about the fact that, in recent years, the issue of social equity and rising inequality have really come to the forefront of the national dialogue. And from an economist's point of view, this inequality and the resulting economic disparity is really problematic from an economic development perspective. And, our recent experience with COVID-19 really pointed out that not all of our residents were equally impacted by the pandemic. And we did work here at Sandag where we saw, and we put these reports out before, that areas with high concentration of people of color were more likely to be impacted by COVID. We found that people with low incomes and people who lived in communities with low incomes were also disproportionately affected in terms of job loss. And it's been over a year now since we've had these lockdowns with the pandemic, and nearly 100,000 San Diegans are still without work. The higher income people have all gone back to work. In fact, we've had job gains in the $60,000 plus category in terms of employment. But nearly 1 in 4 people who earn less than $27,000 a year, which is about minimum wage, are still without a job. So there's a huge bifurcation there. And broadband and connectivity is one of the problems that was really pointed out here during this crisis. The disparity was really pointed out. I mean, when you take a look at this, 1 in 4 households without a broadband subscription were families that earned less than $50,000 a year. And this resulted in somewhere between 20 and 40% of students lacking home internet access. And this is extremely important because education in this new economy where everything is becoming more and more computerized and more sophisticated is absolutely crucial to overcome the economic inequality as well as wage gaps. And so we have to be able to educate the kids, and when 40% of them lack internet access, this is a huge problem for the region. And when we take a look at our rural communities, which include where our tribal nations are, we're looking at 42% of the people living there who do not have access to fixed internet. So this was really highlighted during this COVID crisis. Next slide, please. So you can click it one time if you'd like to. Persistent inequality and economic disparity make it extremely difficult for large segments of our population to realize their full potential. I think that's key. And to fully contribute to the region's economy. And what this ends up doing is it really ends up shortchanging the economy in many respects. Greater economic equity helps people engage more, and it helps them add value, and that makes the economy perform better overall. And there are some tangible economic and fiscal benefits that come from closing the wealth gap. And they include things like a significant boost to our long-term economic growth. And we measure this as GRP, or gross regional product. You hear me speak about this all the time in our reports in terms of how the region's GRP is doing. This would help significantly boost that. A better and skilled and more productive future labor force, one that's ready to take on those technological changes that we've talked about at some of the board meetings. This is happening extremely quickly and as we speak. Increased tax revenue from a federal and a local and a state perspective results from higher paying jobs. And most importantly, fewer people really needing safety or social safety net programs. And so these are all benefits of economic equality. Inequality and economic disparity are really very big and complex issues. And as part of the data science team, as we're able to add more staff to this particular group, we would really like to study ways of being able to measure this and being able to give actionable data to you, our elected officials. Using the data, we took a look at 3 underserved communities. So you can click a couple times here. And they're the low-income population, as Colleen mentioned, our senior population, and our community of color. So I'd like to give you just a little bit of background on those 3 populations. Next slide, please. This is the distribution of household income in San Diego in 2016. 2016 is the base year of our regional plan. And there's no question that the San Diego region is an expensive place to live. I mean, our cost of living here is about 60% higher than the US average. And with the exception of healthcare, everything in San Diego is more expensive than the national average. But what really stands out here is housing. Housing is 2.8 times as expensive as the rest of the nation, and our transportation costs are 20% greater than the rest of the nation. And it's also no secret, and we've talked about this, and Council Member Jack Hsu brings it up all of the time, that we're a very auto-centric region, and most people have very few alternatives, practical alternatives to owning a car. So the average cost of owning a car here in San Diego is about $12,000 a year. So if you take a look at this chart, you can see that about 35% of the families, these are households, in the San Diego region earn less than $45,000. So after taxes, that $45,000 becomes about $36,000. That's $36,000 to pay for your family's rent, for their utilities, for food, for clothing, for the children, and for transportation. There's over 400,000 households in San Diego who fall into this category. And that represents roughly 1.1 million people in our region. That is an incredibly large number of people who fall into this category. And they're almost literally forced to purchase an automobile if they want to be able to get to work in other places, because we don't have those options of getting out of the automobile. The barrier to being able to get to work or to shopping or to drop your kids off at school really creates a barrier to economic equity. And that's why it's so important for us to realize that economic equity has to be part of the regional plan. Many of our residents end up having to choose between purchasing an automobile or finding different ways of getting around. And I think this graph really shows that out. Even people who are living in the most walkable communities, like North Park, for instance, in urban areas, if they're not employed there, they also don't really have an option if they need to go other places other than the automobile. And so this is a real issue that we're addressing in the plan. The next slide, please. The other thing I'd like to talk about is the aging of the region's population. I mean, the graying of San Diego is fast approaching. If you take a look at this, this is a population pyramid, and what it shows is males on the left-hand side, females on the right-hand side, and for each 5-year age category, so the babies are on the bottom and old people are on the top, it shows how many people are in that category. You see that 20 to 24-year-old male is a long bar. That has to do with our military population. It's pointed out there. And what you see also is that there is a lot of very similarly linked bars between 30 and 50 years old, and then it kind of tapers off as the people get older. But take a look at what happens by 2050. Our population pyramid changes considerably. We still have the military population represented by that long bar. But if you click one more time, what you'll see is that we will have 605,000 residents who are age 75 plus in the region. Okay, by 2050, we will have 1 million people in the region. So almost 1 in 3.5 that will be age 65 plus. This is an enormous number of seniors who really have to have different ways to get around, because where they need to go is completely different. I mean, this is not a crisis right now, but we're soon going to be faced with the reality that 1 in 4 citizens here in San Diego is going to be age 65 plus, and they're going to be living on fixed or reduced incomes. And so our current transportation system, as it's laid out right now, is not designed to deal with this type of unprecedented demographic shift. This is something that hasn't really happened in this region. So, when we look at the seniors in 2050 also, they're not going to be confined to their homes. They're going to be healthy and active. They're going to be a modern generation of seniors who are kind of focused on their total well-being. They're going to need access to medical facilities, access to recreational activities, shopping, et cetera. An option like a flexible fleet, for instance, or transit going conveniently to some of these places through mobility hubs, as we've outlined in the 2021 plan, really addresses the needs of this future population. And this is when the plan is going to be finished. And so it's important to remember what we look like there. This regional plan that we're planning on releasing on the 28th, it really greatly benefits this segment of our population. And the next slide, please. So the San Diego region of tomorrow will look completely different than the San Diego of today or the San Diego of the past. Going back to 2000, this shows you the demographic distribution within our region. 55% of our population was white, and about 45% of our population were people of color. Going to 2016, what you see is that the white population as a percentage has decreased to 46%, And the fastest growing population segment is the Hispanic segment, which has grown to 34%. As we move out to 2050, what we see is that the Hispanic population and the white population will be almost identical, and 60% of our total population will be made up of people of color. So the one thing that I kind of like to conclude with is that this regional plan that we're proposing to release on the 28th, it's the first regional plan that really addresses not only reduction in VMT and GHG, which I know are incredibly important metrics to look at, but it's the first one that truly addresses some of the social inequity that we have in a meaningful way. And it provides economic opportunities for our most disadvantaged communities to get the education that they need, to be able to get to jobs that are paying jobs, and to really have an alternative to the automobile. And so with that, I'd like to hand it over to Tueri to really dig into this a little bit deeper.
Great. Okay, so as part of the planning process, staff has been committed to centering its work through the lens of equity. To advance the goal of providing a fair transportation system, a regional social equity planning framework has been developed in partnership with SANDAC working groups by presenting it to different audiences and considering best practices in equitable planning. And through this process, we have identified 5 interreliant actions that form the basis of the SANDAC Regional Social Equity Planning Framework. And this includes data accountability, how we use it, and how it informs our work. Measuring impacts, understanding both the benefits and the trade-offs of our plans, programs, and projects. Prioritizing investments, really looking at how we fund and prioritize investments within our under-resourced communities. Monitor, report, and evolve. Really making sure that we're committed to ongoing monitoring and reporting to evaluate the actual benefits or the negative impacts that our work may cause. And last but certainly not least, engagement, ensuring an engagement process that is fair, is transparent, and it is inclusive. And these 5 actions rely on continuous learning. So we must be open and adaptable to how we approach, incorporate, and prioritize social equity in our plans, programs, and projects. And this framework has been used throughout the development of the 2021 regional plan and will continue to be used, refined, and enhanced through the development and implementation of it. So putting our equity statement and our equity planning framework into action, we have contracts with 13 community-based organizations that provide funding to them, and you can see them listed here on the screen. They're also represented by the maps on this circle so that you can understand where they're at within our region. And together they make up the Social Equity Working Group. And this working group is a public forum for communities that have traditionally been left out of the planning process to really have a voice in the development of the 2021 regional plan. Next slide. Here you can see some of the activities and engagement that we've had within our communities. The Social Equity Working Group has helped facilitate meetings for us using different strategies and techniques to really engage the community members, from transit and tacos pop-ups to imagining how mobility hubs could look in their community. And the most common request that we heard from communities, what they really wanted to have safe, reliable, affordable access to transit options that really helps people get from their jobs and other destinations that they need to go to. And the pandemic hasn't stopped the engagement. Our community-based organizations and our working group continue to meet monthly, virtually, to discuss and inform the various aspects of the plan. And we provide a number of online resources to help plan details, such as the example you can see there in the middle icon. This is an example of our interactive mapping tool that's in both English and Spanish, and it allows people to see how the projects within the plan will really impact their community and where they're located throughout the region. So in addition to all the feedback and input that we received from the Social Equity Working Group and the communities that they represent, we engaged and listened to our tribal partners, holding a workshop with our 17 tribal nations. And we also held a workshop, a binational workshop in Mexico, to ensure that this plan takes into consideration the needs and contributions of people who cross our borders every day. So all of this engagement has been important as part of data accountability that I mentioned earlier, and the data-driven planning process that you've often heard us speak about for this plan. This really means not just looking at the numbers, but really engaging with the community, with the stakeholders and our partners, and bringing their input into the planning process. So social equity within the regional plan looks at several populations within our region. Colleen and Ray both mentioned these earlier. This is people of color, this is low income populations, and this is our senior populations, as you can see here on the map. And it also looks at the communities impacted by poor air quality, as shown in the red and orange colors in this map here on your right. You can see the map on your left, the areas with the highest concentrations of underserved populations also have significant overlap with the areas that have poor air quality, as you can see on the map on the right here. So the 5 big moves have been the key strategies used to address the mobility needs and concerns that we've heard from our communities. It really provides a more affordable transportation system that allows for more people to have greater access to jobs, education, and healthcare, all of which contribute towards economic equity. So this slide shows 3 maps here that highlight our 3 social equity focused populations with the proposed transit network overlaid on top of that. And the map on the left shows our communities of color. The map in the middle shows our low income populations, and the map on the far right is our senior population. And when you put in place the proposed network that's layered on top, you can see that it improves access for our underserved communities, giving them true mobility options and an alternative to driving. So in addition to transportation investments, there are supporting programs and policies proposed in the plan that support other equity considerations. These new investments include things such as transit fare subsidies, that could be used for youth opportunity passes, or subsidies for low-income populations, and housing grant programs that encourage new affordable housing and mobility hubs, while also ensuring our investments don't lead to displacement. So now I'm going to talk through some of the social equity performance measure results that are coming out of the 2021 regional plan. I'm only going to discuss approximately half of the social equity performance measures that are shown here on the screen, but these are a subset of a much larger number of measures that are completed for the plan. So one of the obstacles to economic and social equity in our current transportation system is that not enough people have reasonable access to an alternative to driving alone. And as mentioned before, there's a significant underserved population in the San Diego region, and across all underserved populations, only about 1 in 10 people have access to an alternative other than a vehicle. And as you can see in the chart here, the 2021 regional plan triples access to alternative forms of transportation in the region by 2035 for all of our underserved populations. And these numbers will continue to grow through 2050, which is the horizon year of our plan. So in this slide, you can see the blue dots on the map here. They represent our region's colleges and universities, junior colleges and vocational schools. And educational attainment is really more important to our communities of color that just showed on the map, and our low-income communities as shown in the yellow and the orange dots here on the map for economic success than ever before. Increasingly today, more jobs are requiring a skilled and more productive workforce, which creates a growing need for college-educated workers. So currently, only about half of these groups can access higher education within 30 minutes on transit. And the proposed investments in the plan, we provide more competitive transit options for more people to higher education institutions, and that'll continue to grow in 2050. And providing economic equity also means having a transportation system that provides competitive alternatives to driving alone in terms of time. And so today, some of our longest work trips that people take are often taken by people from low-income households. And in some cases, people spend as long as 2 hours or more each way to get from home to their place of employment. And a faster transit system and a more expansive transit system allows for a much larger percentage of those underserved populations to get to work in a reasonable amount of time. And so let's look at transit access for Tier 1 employment centers. These are the blue areas shown on the map, and they contain most of our corporate headquarters, our manufacturing, and our government jobs, and they represent nearly 1 out of 4 jobs in the region. And these employment centers can also contain some of the highest paying jobs and the highest job growth areas with the most economic opportunities in the region. So currently only about 40% of people of color and our low income population can get to these areas on transit within 45 minutes, as you can see here on the slide, and even fewer can get there in less than 30 minutes. But by 2035, our system will provide significant improvements, and more than half of these people can get to Tier 1 employment centers within 45 minutes. And as you can see, those numbers really do continue to grow through 2050. And we see similar results with Tier 2 employment centers, where another 304,000 people are employed at places like retail centers and hospitals, and that represents about 1 in 5 jobs in our region. And currently, a little more than half of our low income and people of color can access Tier 1 employment centers within 30 minutes. But by 2035 and the proposed investments of the plan, that can bring substantial gains to those numbers. And by 2050, about 2/3 can get to work in 30 minutes, and more than 80% can get there in 45 minutes. So one thing this pandemic has shown us is the importance of access to medical facilities. And you can see that right now we actually have pretty good numbers in this category as far as a performance metric, but these numbers will continue to grow with the planned investments by 2035. And by 2050, we really begin to approach near universal transit access for medical facilities for our underserved populations. So the ability for people to access retail to shop for necessities such as groceries, clothing, it's critical no matter who you are. However, many low-income populations and communities of colors experience food deserts where quality goods and services are not offered in their neighborhoods. And the ability to expand access to retail throughout our region for these communities, it really is vital for improving health and furthering our region's economy. By 2035, approximately 2/3 or better of our underserved population will have transit access to retail within 15 minutes, and additional increases are shown in 2050. So Colleen mentioned earlier there's something new that we have to do as part of this regional plan, and State Assembly Bill 805 requires an environmental justice approach to developing the regional plan. And this includes developing transportation strategies to reduce pollution exposure for disadvantaged communities. And for the 5th year in a row, San Diego has been ranked as the 6th worst region for ozone pollution in the United States. And the San Diego region has 37 census tracts in that top 25% of the communities most burdened by pollution across the state. And you can see those census tracts identified in the dark orange on this map here. But pollution isn't just limited to those communities in the dark orange alone. There are also other areas within our region that vary in pollution exposure, and we've identified those in the gold shown on this map here. But the 2021 regional plan, it really provides mobility opportunities such as transit, flexible fleets, active transportation, that when they're coupled together can help alleviate pollution burden on these underserved communities. And there are also supporting policies within the plan to reduce pollution burdens on those communities. An example of one of our policies is the adoption of electric vehicles region-wide. This policy aims to incentivize and encourage incorporation of all types of electric vehicles into flexible fleets, transit goods movement. And it also supports funding programs that increase electric vehicle charging stations throughout the region and within the mobility hubs. But regional collaboration will be key to achieving reduced pollution or seeing the fruition of any of these performance measures that we've discussed here today. And I'll turn it back over to Colleen.
Thank you. So just to wrap up here, as Ray mentioned early on, the persistent inequity and economic disparity in our region make it difficult for segments of our population to realize their full potential and to fully participate and contribute in the regional economy. And again, the populations, just so we're clear, people of color, low-income communities, seniors, and people living in areas with poor air quality. And hopefully, as we've been able to share with you here today, the 2021 regional plan proposes a system of transportation improvements, supporting programs and policies that when brought together address social equity in a truly meaningful way. And we hope that you'll be able to participate in the upcoming workshops where we'll be sharing additional details on the plans on May 17th or May 21st. Both workshops will include the same content, and we'll be able to dig in deeper into these specific system improvements. So finally, to wrap up with the regional plan timeline, and if you want to go ahead and just click on all of this, Anna, that would be terrific. After we release the draft plan this spring, so we'll do the 2 workshops on the 17th and the 21st of May, May 28th, the plan will be released for public review. And then later this summer, the draft environmental impact report will be released for public review. And then we plan to bring the plan and the EIR before the board of directors at the end of the calendar year. So thank you very much for your time today, and I'll turn it back over to our chair.
Thank you so much for that presentation. So thorough. I'm going to go ahead and ask if there's any public comments before I ask any of the members.
Yes, Chair, we do have a few public speakers. We have 4 so far. The first will be Carolina, who will be followed by Noah Harris.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Carolina with the Environmental Health Coalition. I really appreciate the presentation and all the details and the data. It's super helpful to understand what part of the population is. We're talking about 1 million plus people that are in the low income household category. And so I'm just wondering, as we think about equity, what part of those projects will provide immediate mobility solutions to this population? We're hearing a lot of 2035, but as we know, the pandemic has exacerbated conditions for our communities. And so it's really important to understand the phasing of the projects and understand what part of the projects are going to provide immediate solutions, because unfortunately our communities can't wait anymore. And if we're talking 2035, we're talking more than 10 years from now. So that's another generation. It would be really valuable to hear from staff specifically on benefits to our community, immediate benefits. I'm also wondering, so if we look at the Tier 1 employment centers, based on the previous presentation, what part of the Tier 1 employment centers, what's the representation of low-income communities of color that are within the Tier 1 employment centers? Just to get an understanding of how is it that we're really providing connectivity to our communities, because if they're not accessing this employment, the Tier 1 employment centers, then how are we really planning for them? So those are kind of the 2 questions I had. I really appreciate the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carolina. Next will be Noah Harris, followed by B. Mittermiller.
Good morning, Chair and Board. This is Noah Harris with Climate Action Campaign. Thank you to the staff for today's really thorough presentation. Every San Diegan deserves access to equitable mobility options that connect us to our basic needs, and today that system does not exist. As was emphasized, low-income communities and communities of color face some of the worst consequences of our current system: dangerously high levels of air pollution from cars and trucks, and disconnected transit trips with low access to job centers. What's more, the climate emergency is barreling down and will disproportionately impact those same communities, such as extreme heat, flooding, wildfires, and more. You now have a real opportunity to drastically slash emissions towards zero carbon, all while building a more equitable transportation future. We urge you to prioritize climate and transportation investments through the 2021 regional plan in historically underinvested communities on the front lines of the climate crisis and environmental injustices. And finally, we want to urge you again to please make sure to include youth opportunity passes in the RTP, as this is an essential investment in our youth. Thank you.
Thank you, Noah. Next will be B. Mittermiller.
Good morning, members of the board. I want to express my agreement with both Carolina and Noah in the points they make. Specifically, that action needs to be taken ASAP. We can't wait 15 years for the rail lines to be built. We need something now that will give people an attractive alternative to using their cars. And that leads me to also comment on the presentation about telework, where initially folks were thinking that telework would be a big component of reducing VMT. And we saw today that really it just sort of shifted it around, which is incredibly depressing, frankly. And so I hope that Sandag staff can keep these facts in mind when they are working on the initial rollout of the RTP, and what we can do immediately to benefit our underserved communities and our communities generally speaking. Everybody is suffering with the raise in temperatures over the years. And it would be tragic if we run out of time because the best solutions aren't implemented immediately. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, I'm going to go to Nicole Burgess. And after Nicole, I see a Sue Alpert with her hand raised. Sue, I'm not sure if your hand is raised to be promoted or if you would like to make a public comment. Could you let me know or put your hand down? Nicole, you can go ahead with your comments now. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you again for the time to make some comments on this extremely important topic, equity, and how staff and Sandag is being mindful and including it into the process. It needs to raise and continue to be raised. And I appreciate Carolina and other comments from the public really about how these folks really are they going to the tier 1 employment areas? So really those are big questions, and where our people are traveling, as Ray Major showed. My comments really address something that I kept hearing over and over. Ray Major, I think you kept saying it a couple times. The only option is not a car. We have options. North Park to downtown and Employment District 1, Tier 1 is accessible by a bike. It is actually doable, and we cannot, as staff and as a leading agency, continue to say that a car is our only option. We have many Sandag members that actually ride their bike to work daily from North Park, from City Heights. 5 of the military bases are within that commute of 5 miles. A huge reason why I am an advocate for Troyes Creek Regional Park that can connect La Mesa, Lemon Grove, all the way to that employment area district tier 1 place. I'm in Ocean Beach, a tier 2, and I know that these communities can do that ride. For those of you who don't know, I was not always a bike crazy active commuter. I actually drove a car because I thought that was the only option. We have to help our residents, especially these folks that need better solutions, that it is actually an option. The e-bike actually makes that an extremely valuable option. And for all of you in those, your leadership positions, I thank you for all you do. And I really, want you to support our state level and other agencies to getting these e-bikes in these people's hands, because and then building the infrastructure, right? We need safe facilities. I can't say that enough. So as our big 5 moves is always the answer, let's address a couple key components of that. Until our iOS addresses the digital divide, it fails. We need to prioritize e-bikes in our flexible fleets. Otherwise, we keep enabling unhealthy lifestyles. And we need to ensure that our mobility hubs are connected with active transportation. Safe routes to schools is extremely important. And just know that I do travel all 19 jurisdictions by bike. And so I know the beauty of all your neighborhoods. And I encourage you to get out and explore it, because until you do, you don't realize what you've got.
Thank you. And Chair, that does conclude the public comments.
Thank you. Are there any member comments? Member Xu?
Thank you. I don't know if the other MPOs in California are doing this, and I don't know if Sandag is doing this because of AB 805, but I must say that I'm so happy, proud to have economists from Sandag say how important equity is and that it helps our economy. That it's not only what is just and needed, but it's actually good for the economy. So yes, we need to address equity. And I must also say how happy I am to see a staff person in Sandag address equity and to point out and explain what equity means, as well as the populations and communities that are affected by inequity, and how this plan may address how we can improve conditions in those communities in terms of health as well as transportation options. I do have some concerns, of course, with regards to how we're going forward. One is, as the plan calls for improvements in each of these groups, whether it be the seniors, people of color, people of low income, going into 2035 and 2050, first of all, I think those improvements are going to go for other populations, of course, that the white population, people with lots of money, are also going to have similar kinds of improvements. And in the past, what's happened is, as improvements go for the people of color, people of low income, sometimes the improvements are greater for people who have money or people who are of white and have other means and privileges. So sometimes, though we identify improvements for in trying to reach equity, we end up doing more improvements for the other populations. So actually, we don't improve equity at all. We actually have a problem. So I hope we consider that. The other thing is immediacy, and I think that's been brought out by some of our speakers. We are so far behind that we need things to happen in the next 5 years, not in the next 10, 15, 20, 25, 20 some odd years. And to that, I hope our plan does help implement things right away. There's no reason why we can't have a pilot programs in these communities, in the target communities, starting next year. As soon as this plan is approved, we can go forward with pilot programs in some of these communities that have been waiting for so long, whether it's in San Ysidro, National City, or some of our target areas in East County. We can do this now, not 10 years from now. These pilot programs will show us which systems are going to be viable and workable. Youth Opportunity Passes has been asked for by the community for over a decade. I was part of that advocacy work. There's no excuse for MTS, no excuse for North County Transit to implement that next year. And I would be asking all those entities to do that in that manner. There's no reason why we cannot reprioritize our budgets and move forward on that. And I hope this plan not only calls for that, but we at Sandag Board help implement that as we go forward. So I hope that's something that we can work on. I really want to thank the staff for working on this and all the nonprofit organizations, the CBOs that have helped put this equity plan forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Chu. Other members, comments? Member Aguilar?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I couldn't find the mute button. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I think it's so important that we have a frank and honest discussion about equity, and that we continue to do so frequently here in Sandag and all the other agencies, as we have been doing in MTS as well. I'm very interested in ways we can incentivize getting people in an efficient way to job centers. Of course, I mentioned it before, as a representative of my community, that's a workforce community, but also as an MTS representative. I want to echo what Councilmember Xu said. I want to definitely explore ways that we can supplement funding so that we could offer youth opportunity passes. As a person who who was there at some point early in my life. I had to take 2 buses and a trolley to get to school and to work. And so many times I was very close to giving up and not finishing college because it was just very, very tough. It was 2-3 hours commute. So I think that uplifting and supporting our young population, getting to where they need to go, which is whether educating themselves or getting an early jump start in their careers is very, very important. So I also want to continue to explore ways that we can support that effort. That's it for me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, member. Any other members? I think I also just want to emphasize how important this work is as we're moving forward, and I appreciate the diversity of the amount of people that actually were involved in this process, especially the organizations on both sides of the border and on the other side of the border. I did have some questions about, and just to follow up to some of the comments, you know, the youth the issue of youth, right? And as part of the social equity analysis is, I think, important. And how do we, I really like the idea of member Chu and his comments about how could we do some pilot programs around this and think about moving this a little bit faster. I think we have to acknowledge that transit has been underinvested in San Diego, particularly in communities of color for many years. And so whatever we can do to really address that as part of the social equity vision, I think is really important and incorporating into our plan. I also think it's, as I'm thinking about this, and I should probably ask Hassan about this separately, but I'll just ask it here. You know, the community colleges, and we keep talking about, and having been a former trustee, right? They're such an important piece of this discussion, but they're not really at the table, right? And our students, I mean, they can comment and so on, but I'm wondering, maybe we should think about maybe in the transportation committee, have representatives, invite them to be part of the conversation, since they represent such an important piece of our population, both for, you know, economic development, but also what we want to make sure is we get into them actually using transit more often, right? And so what do they need as well? And so thinking about how we incorporate our education system into these conversations as well, I think would be really important. So anyway, thank you. Are there any other member comments? No, seeing that, I just want to say thank you to the team. This is such a wonderful and powerful conversation to have. I really appreciate it. And so with that, seeing no other public comments at this moment or any member comments, our next Transportation Committee meeting is scheduled for Friday, June 4th at 9 a.m. And the next Regional Planning Committee meeting is also scheduled for Friday, June 4th. And then the next Borders Committee meeting is scheduled for Friday, May 28th. All right. With that, our meeting is adjourned.